Good evening. My name is Thurman Greco, and I'm coming to you with my program, Let's Live with Thurman Greco. And we come to you from Channel 23 in Woodstock, New York, and from the YouTube channel, Let's Live with Thurman Greco. And I'm very excited this evening because we have such a special guest. And we have, we have Linda Diamond, who is one of Woodstock's treasures. She is a dancer, and I believe we're going to have some interesting things happening this evening. But I'm going to start off by asking Linda to introduce herself to you, because only Linda can get the full story in.
Thank you, Thurman. Well, I'm a choreographer, and I've had a long career as a dancer. I also teach, and I'm doing some writing as well about dance and other experiences in the field. And coming up now, June 11th this year, we will have two performances at the Woodstock Diamond Dance Theater, which I created. And there will be two different programs of mostly my work and also some work by Anna Sokolow that we have in our repertory. The program will be definitely suitable for children of all ages. We even have one of my young students who's 11 years old now who will be performing with professional dancers. And then there'll be a variety of different multicultural themes and all types of very colorful music and costumes. So I think it'll be fun for people, and by having two different programs, we won't have the audience sit through too long a show, but they'll be able to pick according to the time they're available to see our program, which is the Woodstock Diamond Dance Festival. I've been doing for at least 20 years now. I leave a few years out to make us younger. But I really appreciate being here, and I hope that our viewers will keep that in mind, that we're looking forward to seeing many members of the community and people who are coming from far areas and also from nearby camping areas that I hear are being set up, and hopefully they'll get to see some of what the Woodstock culture is about.
Linda, how can you get the tickets? How do you find out how to get to the theater?
Oh, well, it's located at 1766 Glasgow Turnpike, 2 doors up from the Woodstock Jewish congregation near Route 212. And the phone number, it's early now for reservations, but we'll talk about it hopefully another time, 845-679-7757. And we usually have publicity in our local newspapers, and they like to send a photographer, which is always helpful to promote the work. So I'm looking forward to that, when our publicity starts to roll in, like about a month before. In the meantime, we're anticipating a few grants, but we don't know how the future will be. But the show must go on regardless, so that's my outlook on it. Because to me, this is not like running a corporation. I mean, it is a not-for-profit corporation, but not in the sense of what the regular business world is like. So that's why I continue in my field, because it's very dear to me. And I guess many of the dancers also have such an inspiration to continue. For instance, one young girl who didn't get to come to the audition is begging to come there. She had a twisted ankle the day before, and I said, okay, are you sure you're all right? You can watch. And she said, oh, I'm much better. I can go, And it shows you the determination and love, which really warms my heart, because it shows you the dedication and the inspiration that these young dancers and performers have, that they must continue, and they don't want anything interrupting them. Even a twisted ankle, is not going to stop them from going towards the goal. And that's, I guess, how I was and still am, probably. So I really appreciate, and I enjoy them even more now at this stage in my career, because I know what they go through as far as, taking on several different jobs and juggling, issues, with roommates or whatever. Money, of course, is the main thing, issue. And yet it's really like, the Darwinian cliche, only the strongest will survive. And I think that's really something you can say about the performers, because they don't let anything get them down, and they've all come out of this long hiatus with the pandemic, and everybody's overjoyed to be able to get back into the rehearsal room and, you know, work towards concerts that we're doing. So it's
Well,
even more meaningful, you know.
What is the theme of the show this year?
Well, there isn't a specific theme, so there are many different things within it. I'm working on a new piece that doesn't have a title yet, but I was thinking of calling it Liftoff, which of course we know, you know, is a term. I always like that term. I know it has to do with outer space, whatever. And I think it's such a positive, upbeat idea. And the composer, whom I was able to meet just by chance, it turns out he lives in Saugerties, but he's also on tour, traveling around the world, conducting, and this piece has been performed in many places. It's actually called Skyline, which is a section of the Big Apple that he created. And yet I want to use my own abstract interpretation of the piece, so I can't talk about it till it's created. But when he asked me, when I finally got to meet him, he said, well, do you know what you're going to do and everything? I said, no. I said, you know, I just let my, you know, free association take over. And as I was talking to you earlier, too, in choreography, of course, we have to have structure and a theme, but there's also letting the child within take over, which is very different from the classroom and the composition classes. And I firmly believe in that, because I also refer to it as labor pains, you know, while the piece is still being developed, you know, you're going through all this angst and whatever, and then later it becomes something that even you maybe didn't expect or didn't know it was going to be that way. So it's like giving birth, I guess you would say.
Well, now, I have heard some stories about you meeting people by chance,
Yes.
and including them in your productions.
Yes, that happened very recently. Well, we're going to see in a little while an excerpt, but not yet, of Panamanian Suite, and I called it that because I'm from Panama, and the way I was inspired was I was crossing a street in New York, and there was a blind gentleman, and I said, can I help you cross the street? So we started talking. And I said, well, I'm from Panama, and I'm a choreographer. I'm going to rehearsal. He said, well, guess what? I'm from Panama, too, and I'm a musician. And I said, oh, we have to do something together. So in this piece, which I'm going to revise, because a sequel to that is now years later, one of my dancers who's from Italy said, well, I said, we need another male dancer. She said, well, my boyfriend, family is from Panama. I said, well, that's where I'm from. So I said, he has to come. We have to join. Now I have to put him into Panamanian Suite, because we have a kind of affinity to the country, those of us who were born there, or people, even Americans who lived there for a while, who went to school, the American school with me. When they go back, you know, they have such a love for the country because it's so rich in colorful, you know, costumes for carnival, and then they have the art, and the music is all around, you know. I mean, even my brothers, you know, they would tap on somebody's back, you know. They're always, I guess it's like that in Brazil too, but the rhythm and the music is always around everybody, you know, and they're always, you know, even when they come into a classroom, some students did when I was in the New York Department of Ed, you know, they'd come dancing into the class, you know. I mean, that's part of the Latin heritage. So we combined, I had something to do with the music because it's sort of abstract, but then he plays the drums, percussion, guitar, and he sings, which is amazing. His name is Braulio Thorne. And I asked him to put in some well-known folkloric songs, so he sings in the middle somewhere, you know, and the dance costume is called the pollera, which I wear. It's what they wear, the national costume of Panama, and then the women wear these tembleques. I couldn't find them anywhere, but I finally found a place I could order them, and they're these little, tembleque means shaking, shivering, and or trembling. And that's what the name of the headpiece is. There are all these different things that you put in your hair, and they stick out and they move like that when the person is dancing, and I have recently acquired some for that. So even though it's going to be based on some authentic influences, it also will be an abstract interpretation of a person thinking back on her childhood, reminiscing, and then suddenly, the culture emerges, through the drummer. So it's a lot of fun to be able to, use your imagination in an abstract, esoteric way, for want of a better word, and then combine maybe accents or influences of a specific culture. So now we can see a short version of me dancing the solo of Panamanian Suite with the musician playing, and his name is Braulio Thorne. Okay, that was just a short excerpt. And there's more later on. But I took liberties with the costume. That's the pollera, which they
Now,
wear.
tell me about that costume.
Well, technically it means the chicken coop, because pollo is chicken, and I guess pollera, I have to find out the origins. I don't really know, because it was always around me as a child, that was the costume. And they, as I said, they wear a very intricate headpiece. But the fun thing about it is that, in one of the movements that they have, where a whole group dances around, the man stands in back of the woman waving his hat, and she's leading the procession, which is very interesting, because it's like a statement, behind the scenes, the matrons are the ones that make the decision. Not quite, but I mean, I'm just making fun of that. But it's a very lively dance, and they have groups that you can also see on YouTube. Recently I discovered where they're professionally choreographed, and they do some beautiful things because the costumes are so wide, and they have a lot of movement that they do, but everybody in unison, like many folkloric dances are, they're supposed to be. But it really, what I learned also recently, which I didn't know all those years, speaking about the music, that there's a lot of Caribbean, a lot of African, a lot of Native American, not Native American, but Native Panamanian, Indian influences, as well as the Spanish. And all of that is evidently influencing the style of music. So that's why I've always found an affinity when I, saw people doing African movement or some of the other styles. Caribbean is very close to my nature, because I guess there was always that influence, whether we realize it or not, in music and dance and people running around, having fun. So I am influenced by many different cultures in my choreography. And as I was mentioning to you, I have a very international group now. I have one young lady named Rati, and she's from India. She's studying modern dance. And then there's a young woman named Ariana, who's from Italy. And then the male dancer has Panamanian background, so I'm going to put him definitely into this as a duet. And then I'm originally from Panama, and then we have two thoroughbred Americans.
Well, now this costume, is this costume something that you just purchased?
No, I had this since I was 17. I have to look in one of the closets and make sure. It started to fade, and I was thinking, they're very expensive now, I hear. They've gotten into this, because I guess people aren't sitting making things like they used to, because they're all like usually handmade. But no, I had it, you know, since I was in college. My parents gave me one or something, but I'll have to dig it up. But there are other new works, as I said, you know, this new piece with Johann de Mege, and then Tom DeSisto, who's a wonderful composer, and he's the chairman of my board, as well as the musical director, who lives in Woodstock and has quite a background, having done music for NASA and Martha Graham Company, or the second company or whatever. And also he has worked professionally, you know, in many television studios in New York doing sound. So he has some works. One of them is called Music of the Spheres, which is my title. And interestingly enough, the theme of that was, which is several years ago, and now people are trying to, you know, they're sending the James Webb telescope around the world to see what the baby universe sounded like and all that. And there was an article in the New York Times Science that I just came across because someone threw out the newspaper, and that's how I find things. And they were talking about scientists are figuring out what the sound of the Big Bang Theory, you know, if you believe in that. And I thought that was fascinating. So also in Shakespeare's time and other literature that you read about in the medieval days, I think they talk about music of the spheres. It's in poetry and a lot of writing too. So I named it that, and it has to do with kind of like the creation theory. And then while the two dancers that I created it for originally were doing, I told them to do something, and I said, wait a minute, that looks like Adam and Eve, you know, and it just came through a, you know, like out of nowhere. I didn't pre-plan it. So it's always interesting to me when I have to explain my work later. I realize that I didn't plan it in words. I let the free association and the, you know, inner child or whatever, subliminal, whatever you want to call it, take over. So that's an important thing in choreography, I feel, because many of us, of course, have had training in composition and choreography and all that, but then you have to throw it away in a way, because I feel that it's a totally different thing than the classroom intensive training, which everybody needs, or many of us do, in order to keep going as performers. But there's a whole different mindset, and I like having that free association freedom, and to let that take over rather than to say, well, we can't do this because this doesn't go with that. And as I was mentioning to you earlier, one of my students, who's a young child, wanted to do a Celtic dance, and I suggested a blouse, and she said, well, that's not very Celtic. And I said, but let's forget about that. We're not doing everything exactly according, you know, sometimes you can take liberties with styles, even within a specific cultural, you know, accent that you might want to put in. But I'm very interested in visual arts concepts. I have some works. One of them is called Dancer's View of Calder's Universe, which was done for public television in Miami quite a while back. But I think it stood the test of time because, you know, people still seem to relate to it. And it's not like any other derivative thing you would see. But I was influenced by the whimsical aspect of Alexander Calder's work, not only the mobiles, but also the splash of color and different ways that he employed, you know, his inner child as well. And also he has fantastic stabiles, and the stabiles were very interesting to me because they have to do with support systems, and so I was interested in how dancers can sort of hold the other person's weight and create sculptural imagery, but through that contact in a new way. So there are many different ways of working, and I'm very excited about working with some of the new recruits. And I also have my principal dancer, Nina Deacon, who is also the rehearsal assistant, and she's been in many of my works and is such a wonderful asset to the company. She really knows a lot about the different pieces, and she has a great not only diplomatic, but a mellow way of working with everybody, which I don't have. But, you know, I always warn them, as it gets closer to the show, you're going to see me at several octaves higher, you know, but don't let it bother you. You know, I warn them. I like to make fun of myself, too. Lately, I've been doing that a lot in my rehearsals, and I think it puts the dancers at ease because they realize, you know, I might seem stern at the beginning, but I don't want to you know, have them feel intimidated. Now, many of us who work with some great elders, were intimidated the minute they walked in the room, like the day that Martha Graham, who was in hiding for quite a few years, came to the studio, and they never used to tell you who was going to teach that class. And suddenly everybody got up, and we were so shocked because she sailed in. You know, she didn't walk, she just sailed in like a boat in a very graceful way. And of course, everybody was trembling with fear because we knew she had a reputation for being really stern, but she was kind. And Anna Sokolow, whom I worked with as well, you know, the minute she entered a room, everyone had to keep their mouth shut, and we held our breath because we didn't want to do one thing wrong as far as our interaction. This is what the old guard was about. And they produced great, you know, products, their dances. Why? Because they weren't that friendly. And I'm not into chummy, you know. I mean, I feel that there has to be a difference, a separation. But now that I've been in the field so long, I want it to also be a little more humane and not separate that type of interaction too much, but at the same time they know there's a boundary there. And so I see that when dancers are realizing that they're being appreciated, that they seem happier. And I never used to tell them that right away. And I thought, oh, they're all leaving with smiles on their face and they can't wait to come back and they want to produce more. So I'm learning as I go along, because I was brought up in a very strict dance training, and I also taught that way. So I'm learning new things all the time. And that's what I find fascinating about staying in one's field, because there's always a new thing to learn, and we also have to remember what our missteps were and try to correct it or not make that misstep again, meaning, you know, to be accountable. So I'm finding that to be very interesting as a life lesson, different lessons that we learn in life. It's not always going to be the same, and we have to shift our way of being so that we can be more productive and have other people, if we're working with a group, have them be more productive. So I heard a very interesting thing on a radio program. It was the end of an interview about a book, and it was more about the corporate world, where people were talking about, you know, how can you have these employees, even if they leave, feel good about what they're doing, and then they'll come back. And they were talking about different aspects of that. And I was thinking, over the years, not everybody, but there were times when different dancers have different auditions or bigger, more money, and yet they'll come back maybe 1 or 2 years later, if they're available. So I was thinking back on my own, you know, of course there are some that are disgruntled, and they enter disgruntled and they leave disgruntled, but that's a different category. So, but I like to be able to have that kind of feeling that, you know, they are getting something out of it for their own artistry. That's what I tell them. I say, you know, I want you to be able to glean something from this so that when you go on to other things, which they all do anyway, they're all flying by night, that they will feel that they receive something from this, you know, interaction and the production and the shows. So it's kind of like when people used to say, how many dancers do you have? And I would say, well, I have to count. I would say it's kind of like someone that has a lot of children, and some are away, and some are coming back, some are here, you know, and I had to count. You know. But it's not that I want to be the mother hen, although one of my young students said, when I did a little improv with the two children who were then 9 years old, and I said, well, I'm going to join you in this dance. And I said, but I feel like the mother hen. She said, you are the mother hen. So that was so cute, you know. So well, I think about it now.
People have a tendency to attract themselves to you, which when I think of you and what I know of your relationships with dancers and other people around you, that I really, some people would use the word kismet, and some people would use the word prayer.
Thank you. Really?
Mm-hmm.
How do you know about that? Because I am very spiritual, but in a way that's not affiliated with any particular place. I mean, I am, you know, I'm Jewish, but, you know, I have my own spirituality too, and I bring that to the dance. As a matter of fact, I spoke about that to, they were doing something, I forgot which dance it was, and then but the young woman, Rati, who's from India, was doing something with such a beautiful upward gaze And then I pointed it out to the others, and I said, you see, that's the realm. And then the other ones did it in a better, more soulful way, the movement, the upward bound movement, you know, which is a universal movement that would reflect that. Not always, you know. You might be looking at an airplane. But I don't like the pedestrian approach if it's something that has to be spiritual, which is a word that we can't really define, at least for me. It's not something that, you know, I mean, I'm sure there are descriptions about it. But how did you think about that? I mean, what made you think about that word, prayer, or pray, prayerful?
You just walk in the room, girl. It's just written all over you.
Oh, that's really sweet. I didn't know that. Well, I do feel that inward, you know, and I want to bring that and take that radiance from each dancer and have them bring that out, because it's something that's not always extolled in our contemporary time. And my mission really for this next concert, as well as the more recent one, which we were able to do last June, is to lift up the audience. I think it's very important during these difficult times that we've all been through, and many people have suffered, many people have lost friends and relatives, and also jobs, and it's been a devastating time globally as well. So I feel more than ever that it's very important to bring some light and joy. I'm not saying each piece has to be a happy-go-lucky piece, but something that will help people lift out of their outside world and enter into a different world, at least for that 1.5 or 2 hours. And many years ago, I worked with hospital audiences, and I'll never forget this one very moving moment. I think it must have been like hospice, and a gentleman came over and he said, you know, for one moment there, you know, while you were performing, all of you, it helped lift me up out of everything, and I didn't even think of anything else. And I guess he was terminally ill. He didn't tell us the whole story. And I had to leave. We were backstage, so to speak, where they had us perform, and I had to go out of the room because I started to cry. So that was one of the most moving experiences I've had, because I was performing with the group then as well. And to know that we were able to bring some feeling of joy in their lives, you know, even if it was just a short moment there in time, was something that always has stayed with me, you know. And I think that, you know, the type of dances that I do, I want them to be something that people can relate to. And that's also why I enjoy having dancers that are all different sizes and heights and backgrounds, because it's wonderful, because the audience then can distinguish, first of all, oh, that's the tall girl. Oh, where's the little short girl? Where did she go? You know, and also costuming. They don't always have to have cookie cutter movement and cookie cutter everything the same. And I thought, this is good, because I have something with green and something with yellow, and then they're going to be wearing stretch jeans, which I don't even own jeans myself. And I thought, that'll be good, because then people will say, well, where's the girl in yellow? Where's the boy with the bandana? You know? And so by having the variety, which is really what our world is about, but bringing variety of color and sizes and backgrounds into the concert setting is like having a wonderful hors d'oeuvres. You know, you go to a wonderful smorgasbord and you don't know which one to go to. And I think the eye and the spirit of each person needs to be fed. And that's what we have to do. We have to be able to feed them with something that will really make their hearts feel lifted.
Well, do you feel at this time an extra pressure to do that?
No, I've always had that mission. So it's nothing new. I've always, believed that when you enter into a dance concert, especially, that you want to enter into this never land type of thing, in the sense of another world. That's why I love being in the field in any way. I will be performing a few dances, hopefully, and so I'm excited about that too. But I also give deference to, now it's time for the younger fledglings.
So on the 21st of June?
No, the 11th.
On the 11th?
Yes. Yeah, June 11th. I'll be in.
So you will be dancing then some too?
Yes, I will.
So we've got 2 chances to see you on the 11th of June.
Yes, at 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. And then there's some other pieces that we've done before, but then some of them will be, as I said, this new piece, I think I might call it liftoff. I know that's the term they're using lately, you know, but I thought that's perfect. That's exactly what I feel we have to do, is to lift off, you know, and somehow surmount. And we have quite a lot of challenges in the world right now, so we cannot be oblivious to what's going on. And yet, you know, we have to continue in the best way that we can as artists to reach out and hopefully, you know, bring something that will be meaningful. And I know that there's a lot of people who create things that are very, you know, deeply felt, and I believe in that as well. But I feel that there has to be hope, and I guess I have hopefulness in most of my works, even works that might seem to be sad or whatever. I want to be able to bring hope through my work.
So that is a theme. That is one of your professional themes, is
Oh,
hope?
that's a good idea. Now maybe I should put that in when I have to write my press release. Oh, by the way, I do everything. I know where every little detail is. And the one time that I let this lovely Japanese dancer be in charge of the costumes, luckily we were only 8 blocks away, she forgot it. And I said, oh, this explains why I need to know where everything is. And each safety, well, we don't like using safety pins, but each pin or hairpin or thing, and I know everything, you know, everything that's in the performance has been touched by me in some way, you know, not only lifted, but, you know, prepared or looked or inventory. And, you know, it's just like I kind of have an encyclopedia without having it organized in the way that somebody would. For instance, I don't have, if I put all the costumes into boxes, I'd never find them. But the wonderful thing is they're all backstage now and they're hanging, and it's like a library. You know, you go in and you're not sure what book you're going to read that day, but then you just say, oh, there it is, you know. Or I need a little silver and gold. I have all the gold and silver costumes. Oh, there's the gold.
So you have them organized by color?
Not totally. I have certain pieces that are like circus dances. So I have, you know, different tutus and different things, and I mix and match. But I did do that with the silver and gold because I like sometimes using that on stage. If and when we get good lighting, it can be very interesting, you know, in reflecting. But no, I'm not it's basically organized chaos. So one of my dancers is about to get married, and I met her fiance, and I said, welcome to the chaos. Are you ready for this? But I mean, I'm only saying it to make fun, because the outside person might think, you know, how are they getting this done, you know? But it's really that intuitive approach to saying, okay, now this is another reason why if we're rehearsing, when I used to have the costumes in the rehearsal room, I would say, well, we need a little red, so I grab a red scarf and I wrap it around, or I would like a little green on him. So it's almost like a painter when I work with color and costumes. I mean, a lot of times, you know, it's like, let's say we need a splash of color here or there. So the visual eye is very important. I think I mentioned that before, or maybe I said it before this program. The visual aspect of choreography is very important because it's similar to the way a painter or a sculptor and even somebody who's a photographer has to be able to frame, you know, the movement and think about how does it look from this angle, or somebody's foot is wrong. Sometimes I'm looking at their feet too, you know, and seeing that somebody's like flopping their foot. It's supposed to be flexed, or they're pointing it, but it's supposed to be the other way. So I look in on those little details. And I told them when some of them that came to audition, I had to send them a note saying, do not wear baggy pants, and please don't come here with a bare midriff and showing all kinds, because I don't want to be distracted. If somebody's belly button is sticking, I don't want to be looking at this belly button. I'm not a prude, but, you know, I need to have like a smooth look for the moment until I get to see how they're moving their feet or their legs. And so that also is a very important visual component of how to go. You have to go beyond the body. You have to see the technical part of the body of the dancer, but when the dance is performed, it is, I think it's successful if it goes beyond what body types were. When people look, they say, oh, that person has really long legs, or this or that. But the important thing is to then go beyond that, so that for want of a better word, the spiritual aspect of the work has to flow in a way that gives some kind of meaning, or even if it's abstract, something that people can tune in on, because they're being brought into a whole other dimension and another realm of thinking and experiencing as a viewer. So,
So what you're telling me is that you bring in a dancer or a composer or whatever, because you connect with them in some esoteric or spiritual way, which goes beyond the stereotype. You're not going to have everybody looks the same. There isn't somebody that can go down the street in New York and say, oh, there's a Linda Diamond dancer. You're not going to say that.
No.
They have to have a glow before you're going to have that happen.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. I don't know until I meet them at an audition, but, and then I would rather have the individual, if they don't feel comfortable or don't like the work, then I'd rather have them tell me early on, because this field is not like a hired hand where we show up at a job and, whether we like filing or doing whatever they do now, too bad, you do the job. But this is different because, separately from the fact that it's not hugely paid, we do pay our dancers, and also it's very grueling when you think about the nitty-gritty on what goes on behind the scenes. And so in answer to your question, yes, it's true. I prefer to have everyone have their own individual look, but to be able to, follow through with the style I need. And because these particular dancers that I have now have had such a wide variety of training, it's wonderful, because my training also in New York was with many different styles. I mean, I studied with Merce Cunningham and his style, and Martha Graham style with some of her people who were her male partners, as well as the female dancers. And it was what I call the old guard. And then at Alvin Ailey, where I had a lot of training also with many different styles. And ironically, the director of Alvin Ailey was my 16-year-old student in Miami, so I'm very proud of him. But he did it all on his own. I just was a stepping stone in his early life, and I'm very pleased about that. So, and we all have a ballet background. So because of the universal language, modern dance is very eclectic these days. And for me, it's important if the individual dancer has studied many different styles of modern, and then you just call out something, even though it's not like the ballet vocabulary that has a lot of distinct words for everything. We do have certain words that come from, there's a technique called Wharton technique, which is what Alvin Ailey was trained in as a young man in California. And then, you might say a certain technical term that comes from that, and then they know exactly what it is and they do it. Or they do, an off-balance tilt a la Martha Graham, and they do that. So you just call it out, and when they have this wonderful training that they do, it helps me because the work goes quicker, and I intermingle many different styles within a particular piece. I use whatever is handy or whatever might be useful, and I make up my own movement as well. But when we have a similar eclectic background, it makes it more universal, the understanding, and I don't have to teach someone how to walk across the floor. Sometimes I use art terms. We had to do a rehearsal of it on a Sokolo piece, and it came to my mind, I said, you have to walk very slowly, as if I said, like that, like the surrealist paintings, where they're going through a long tunnel, and it's like infinity. And so then they got the feeling of that, where it's like a never-ending channel that they're walking through. And then you mesmerize the audience with that because of that slow motion effect each step will be different. As you repeat something that seems similar, it actually starts to be a little different. But projecting to the audience is very important to me. I guess because I was in Paris and worked in European groups in the early days, and maybe my aesthetic is influenced by that as well. But, you know, basically I have, my training is in America, and, but I do feel that it's important to, you know, think about what the aesthetics are, and the aesthetics can be many different things for different people. Some people may not like this style or that style, but each individual artist, I think, has to have their own panorama from which to glean how they want to send out the statement, or how they want to be aware that there's an audience there, and that the space around the dancer is almost like a partner. So we relate to the space as well. The space is like an invisible person around the dancer, and so they carve out space as they do certain movements, like a sculptor. They don't realize they're doing that, but I try to bring that out in specific pieces. So I feel that all the arts are really integrated, you know, and that's the wonderful thing about having the liberty in so-called modern dance. Now they say that's an old-fashioned term, but anyway, it's a general catch-all term that includes many, many different styles. There are as many different modern dance styles as there are choreographers currently. But I like the term because, you know, I was sort of brought up with it. But I know there's, you know, different words now that, you know, denote what they prefer to call it. But that's just, you know, jargon. So, as I said, I'm very happy to be back in the saddle, so to speak, even though I don't go horseback riding. And in the sense I use that term, when we get back on track, you know, back to the drawing board again, and it's such a wonderful feeling of elation, because for me, my identity is really connected with that, and the creative process of having the dancers, you know, do movements, especially when I'm starting a new piece, it's a challenge, but it's also a wonderful experience as a choreographer, even though sometimes we doubt ourselves. We say, oh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do justice to this wonderful music, and, you know, but you have to have the courage to do that. But just to immerse oneself in one's art is just a great experience. That's all I can say, and that's why I'm still doing what I do. And despite difficult times or whatever, you know, I try to make it work. And
How many composers are you working with right now?
well, I didn't count all that. I mean, I have some Sephardic music for which we don't know the composers, because the music was passed down over many generations. But I have about, I think, 15 or 16 works, but I'm dividing the program this year, so it's not all one program, which I made the mistake of doing one time. But so I don't know if I can answer that, but as far as contemporary ones, there are about 4. Yeah, there's also someone named Max Lifshitz, who's a very well-known contemporary music composer, and his group is called North-South Consonants. He's originally from Mexico and studied, you know, in New York. I think he went to Juilliard, among other things, and he was a professor at SUNY Albany. So we have a piece by him that he did many years ago, and it's ironic how some of these pieces are relative to what's happening today. His is called Elegía, which means elegy, you know, and it was, I think after the Vietnam War, he wrote some of this as an outcry against war, and it's so pertinent to our time. It just always hits me how certain pieces that I did and music from maybe a while back is again relevant to our time. So I call it Elegía Protesta, elegy protest, and we combined his music with permission with inserts of Tom DeSisto's music, which I really like because it's very contemporary. And then the other piece was originally a solo by me, and it's a piano piece, and he makes the piano sound like machine guns. And speaking of that, I don't like to do too many. Some of my pieces are so pertinent to our time that I have to shelve them for a while. because of what's going on in the world right now. And that's why I'm not doing my Guernica piece this year, because it's a little painful to do that. So, but this Elegía Protesta is a very upbeat thing in a way, because at the end of the dance, one of the girls is lifted up by the group of 5 people, and she's holding a dove of peace at the end, you know. So that was my way of bringing it together. And so he's been a wonderful composer for many years that I've, you know, worked with on and off. And it's difficult, you know, I get along very well with composers because, ironically, you would think that musicians and people in composition want everything square. Well, what are you doing here? There, no, they love the fact that I take liberties with the music and do whatever I want. And then they love that because I'm relating in my own dialogue, so to speak, to what they have expressed in music, which they know is going to be very different in movement. And they're much more open-minded than some of the dancers who were brought up with very strict numbers, you know. And so I don't know why, but I've always found that. And I guess they kind of get intrigued by the approach, because even though I did study music a bit in Panama, but I didn't go beyond do, re, mi, fa, so. I had a test with a ruler, and that's what I had to, they wanted to see if I could hear the beat. And anyway, but they somehow, you know, really create works, and then they don't mind if we take liberties with it, meaning that we don't have to do every movement to every beat. Now, one of the dancers at rehearsal the other day, I was giving them an improvisational thing, and then he said, but wait a minute, let's listen to the music and count it out. And I said, I'm sorry, but you know, I think I repeated myself because I said it before. But so the idea that Merce Cunningham often presented to us in composition classes with him, he would say, you can choose to ignore the music, you can go with the music, or you can just, you know, ignore, go with it, or move in and out of it. So he gave us the choices. He showed us that you have choices. And Merce Cunningham, was notorious for changing the music the day of the show, because I read about some of the stories that the dancers told, you know, where suddenly there was a totally different piece of music during the performance. They didn't even do that during rehearsal in the theater. So, of course, the dancers had to keep their cool and remember their movements, because they were not being having to be on every beat, you know. So he loved that chance type of opportunity, you know, and he was into the I Ching and, you know, a lot of the thing with chance, you know, not exactly rolling the dice and see what happens, but so I love that approach too, because it helps me feel comfortable with making choices. But I am influenced by the music many times, and, you know, I do listen to it, and you know, it depends on the piece, certain pieces. I never like to count too much, but we had a group years ago in Miami, and I was the director, but the assistant director said, while you were away, we counted the music, you know? And then I would say, okay, you count. I said, you can count, but right now we're breathing. Let's breathe. And I'm very into the breath-inspired movement, which, of course, the Jose Limon style and even Martha Graham in the old days and others have been greatly influenced, because the breath flow for the early modern pioneers was a very important ingredient. And then there were people who did yoga who also were dancers, and then they would integrate the breathing that goes with yoga. And breath, by the way, is a very important thing, for whether it's opera singers have certain ways that they have to learn to use their breath in order to keep the flow of the music coming out. And dancers have a different use, in a way, I would say, because it's much deeper down here, I guess the solar plexus, and it comes from inside, so that if you breathe with the rhythm of the movement, and each piece is different, then the person won't be tired out, because they will have that flow of breath going. And sometimes I used to see performances where at the end of the show they came out to do their bow, and especially the male dancers, you know, they'd be out of breath, they were going, like they just run a marathon. I thought, oh, that shows you he probably wasn't breathing with a kind of coordination. The breath flow is it's like a score. It's actually like a musical score underlying the dance movement, even though it's not, I haven't written the score. And I try to explain that to the dancers so that when they put breath as the underpinning that from which the movement flows, they'll be more relaxed, they won't have tension in their shoulders, and the movement will be freer, it'll be more expressive because they're not, worrying about what the next movement is. So when you get into that breath, just like I guess in some of the yoga classes, they must emphasize that in order to have, freedom of the flow of energy, because obviously breath is the flow of energy within each of us, even of course on a daily basis. But it also is integrated into music and the way musicians learn to play wind instruments. I'm sure they have a lot of lessons in that, the use of the breath, so that they can withstand, a long symphonic piece. And it's an interesting thing because our teachers didn't talk about it that much. They were too busy giving the movement. You have to do this and then do 3 turns to the right and step on the left. So, but in the old days with the old guard that I got to study with, they definitely, emphasize that. So I always like to bring that up to the young dancers, and make them aware of that aspect. And it's kind of fun being an elder in a way, too. I don't mind, because I feel now I understand that when we get to be the status of an elder, and we never tell our age anyway as dancers, that we realize that our mission is to pass on this art to the next generation, and then they in turn enjoy getting it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So it's kind of a fun time for me because I have more time to reflect on how I was when I was in their situation, and then they're so busy running from place to place, they don't always have time to reflect. But then since I'm not going to classes as I used to, like 6 or 7 days a week, I have more time to look back and understand what went on and how that strict discipline pays off later. So I certainly don't criticize that, and I think, the strong ones who are determined will surmount all difficulties in order to be able to perform. And that's what I love about the group that I have.
Well, I think the most important thing that you talked about is the wisdom that you're sharing with your people. You're talking about the young people that are on your set. So you're training those young people, and you're sharing of yourself. Mm-hmm. And of course, the movement and the breath, that's where it's all at. I mean, that's the difference between a 2-year career and a lifetime career, mm-hmm. Really. To me, it is.
Oh, that's very interesting you say that. I'm glad that you're aware of that, yes.
And so with your wisdom, then you are giving a lot of your philosophy and your theory to the young people that you're training. And you do this every year? Mm-hmm. So you get a new crew every year?
No, I have some dancers from before, but there's always a turnover when for instance, my wonderful Japanese dancers had to ship out, because their visa was over. Oh. In the last regime, shall we say, for want of a better word. There was another wonderful young woman who's actually had Caribbean background, but she was French, and she was going to be with this top company she had already danced with, and then with very little notice, because the lawyers didn't redo her papers, she had to just leave and go back, and she was hoping to work with me. So I've seen a lot of that because I work with a lot of international dancers, which I enjoy. They've had, difficulties here and there. So, in this field, there's always a turnover because people are running around. I do work now seasonally, just a few concerts, usually in the summer, and which suits me fine. In years back, I was constantly getting bookings and doing things, in every different direction. And, it was a very energetic time, for want of a better word. But I enjoy doing seasonal performances mainly in the summer because we might do some of it outdoors. We're not sure, depending on the weather and whatever. And we're hoping that, with the social distancing, that it will be permissible to have a small audience. That's why also having 2 shows this year on June 11th, which is a Saturday, will be convenient so that we can sort of see how many reservations we have and, you know, have people feel comfortable. Our theater is the Woodstock Diamond Dance Theater, and the good thing is that the whole front row is handicap accessible. Because these are 2 former garages that were joined, people can come in with wheelchairs, and we have all different kinds of seating depending on what makes someone feel comfortable. And we have all different family, I call them a family of chairs, you know. Each row is a different family. They're kind of grouped together, but they're movable. So that's one thing that I'm really happy.
Can you give us your telephone number again?
Oh, yeah. Okay, the phone number for our dance theater is 845-679-7757. And my name is Linda Diamond, and the group is called Linda Diamond and Company. So I hope you'll come to the Woodstock Diamond Dance Theater in June and look for the publicity and tell your friends.
Yeah, that's one of the weaknesses of this show. I keep forgetting to.
No,
and
not at all.
a poster, you know, would be really nice, but I don't
Well, I'll
think
have
about it
one
so much.
later in May, so, you know, maybe I'll come back and
I
say a
hope
few
so.
words.
I hope so.
Thank you, Thurman. It's wonderful being here and sharing some of these ideas, and especially I appreciate your enthusiasm for the arts and for the people in Woodstock who make this the colony of the arts.
Well, you know, the thing is, you are such a jewel, and we haven't had for 2 years, you know, and finally, you're back, you know, and of course, we haven't, there's just been so much that we haven't had. And so it's nice to have your presence again.
Thank you. And I hope that the people who have newly arrived in Woodstock will support the arts, because we are really the people that keep this place going, and it has continued. And I respect and love all the musicians and artists in Woodstock who continue their work regardless, and we want your support. Thank you.
Now, when do you start, like you're working here now for the 11th, oh, we have 3 minutes. Okay, we've got 3 minutes at the risk of for people thinking that I'm being repetitious. Please give the telephone number one more time and the date one more time.
Yes. Okay, so June 11th is our performance at the Woodstock Diamond Dance Theater. 2 dance concerts with different programs, one at 2 p.m. and one at 5 p.m. And you can reach us at 845-679-7757.
Now okay, so it's not going to be the same program twice.
It'll be different we'll try to mention what's on.
Wow, that's amazing. So if somebody wants to, they could buy tickets for both.
Oh, sure, definitely.
Both kinds. Oh,
That
that
would
would be fabulous. Well, thank you so much, Ellen. We are so appreciative of this, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
And we look forward to seeing you again.
Thanks.